Good evening and welcome to Resistance TV. My name's Sian Bloor. I'm in the boss's chair for tonight, so I'll try not to let the power go to my head too much. Tonight we're just going to have a kick back and relax and have a chat with you all. We've got some great people who join us every week, people who've been with us from the very beginning, and I'm sure you'd like to ask lots of questions of Chris and either possibly myself. So tonight's Wednesday the 7th of April, it's 7 o'clock, and I'd like to introduce our guest for this evening, Chris Williamson. How are you doing, Chris?
I'm very well, thanks very much indeed. Thank you for inviting me.
Have you had a good weekend?
Not too bad, yeah. A bit of gardening and enjoying the weather, and then it started snowing. I mean, we had a blizzard yesterday. It was incredible.
Wow, well,
climate change, I put it down to.
That's Derby for you.
Yeah,
mind you, but then we did have a few flakes in Manchester.
The sun soon came out though, because the sun always shines on the righteous.
You've not told me you're a vegan for 2 minutes, Chris.
No.
Without further ado, I've got a couple of questions that I want to start off with. And although I'm not going to be moderating in the chat this evening, our producer Gaz will be there and he'll be taking any questions from people who want to put anything in the comments. Ask us anything you like. It can be about politics. It could be about our plans for the future. You might want to ask us something personal about his political career, anything you like. So I'm going to just kick us off with a couple of questions until people get warmed up and just say good evening to a few of our comrades who are already on the live chat. So hi to Jonathan, hi to Steph, hi to Kevin, hi to Mark. Welcome, James MC. I'm glad my one and only fan is on board this evening. It's great to see you. So Chris, first of all, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into politics?
Oh, crikey. Well, I mean, I joined the Labour Party back in 1976 and was a very active member of the party really from the get-go and campaigned in every single election from 1977 onwards. There was a county council elections that year. And so, yeah, I was very involved in the Labour Party, involved in the trade union movement, active in the Anti-Nazi League. I was very active in the animal rights movement too. And eventually I stood as a councillor. I'd taken various positions as a shop steward, area organiser for Unison, shop steward for NUPA, the National Union of Public Employees, before they merged with COSI and NALGO. And then I'd stood a few times for the Labour Party in hopeless seats, but then eventually got elected to Derby City Council in 1991 and became chair of housing after a few years, and from there deputy leader and then leader of the council. And frankly, I think, to be honest with you, being the leader of the council was the most enjoyable, most rewarding political role I've ever had, because if you like, you're a big fish in a little pond, but we were really able to make a difference on the ground on behalf of local people, and we were really, I think, I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think we were pushing through some really progressive policies. I mean, we were really trying to give form to municipal socialism back then. This was in the early 2000s when I was leader of the council, and we devolved powers and budgets to local people. We brought in other agencies, the police and the health service and other agencies as part of their consultation processes. We kind of combined them so that people could have an influence over other public sector organisations. And we provided a free home care service. We were building some houses, not as many as I would have liked, but we managed to find a way of doing it, even though it was very, very difficult in those days. So that was probably the most rewarding and enjoyable time. And then I got elected in 2010 as an MP for Derby North, lost the seat very carelessly by just 41 votes in 2015, after the Greens stood against us in protest against the direction that the party had taken under Ed Miliband. They didn't want me to lose a seat. They wanted me to win. They was just doing it as a gesture, really. They said that it's safe to stand the Green Party in Derby North because you're bound to get in, Chris. You're going to win by a landslide. And at the count, I remember in 2015, the Green Party candidate got a head in a hand saying, oh, no, this wasn't supposed to happen. We want Chris to win. And we lost by 41 votes. And then, which was a real blow, obviously. But then, Jeremy came onto the scene and managed to get the sufficient number of nominations, and I got very involved in that campaign. And then we saw what happened with the saboteurs in the Parliamentary Labour Party, which made me really determined that if we had an opportunity to get back into, if I had an opportunity to get back into Parliament alongside Jeremy, that I would do everything I could to democratise the party and make MPs properly accountable to the grassroots members. And frankly, if the party had ever listened to its grassroots members right throughout its history, we wouldn't have made the number of mistakes that we did. Even Ed Miliband said that if we'd listened to the party a bit more when we were in government between 97 to 2010, we wouldn't have made the catastrophic errors that we did. So I was determined to do that and push that agenda, but we all know what happened. I mean, I eventually got targeted by the anti-democrats inside the parliamentary lane. Well, I say eventually, it kind of happened more or less straight away. And they were very determined to, stop me and stop the democratic reforms that were being pushed through. And of course, the Zionist lobby was a convenient bandwagon on which to jump. And because I'd obviously taken an anti-imperialist stance and support for the Palestinian people, and actually defended people who had been falsely accused of anti-Semitism, ironically, many of them were Jewish, that was then used as a pretext to kick me out. So that's a real potted history of my time from 1976 to the present day.
Yeah, there's quite a few different strands we could go off on there. But before we do, I want to know who your heroes and villains are from the political scene.
Well, obviously, Tony Benn. I mean, I used to talk about the Holy Trinity, and that was the Holy Trinity made up of a trade unionist, a member of Parliament, and an iconic local government leader. And for me, it was obviously Tony Benn in Parliament. It was Arthur Scargill as leader of the NUM, who really stood by his members, knew what he was talking about. He was a kind of absolute epitome of what a trade union should be, in my opinion. And then from local government, there was a chap called David Bookbinder. People may remember him. He was seen as the most controversial leader in local government after the Tories under Thatcher had got rid of the Great London Council and Ken Livingstone, local authorities like Lambeth with Ted Knight, and obviously Liverpool with Derek Hatton and so on. And so then it was, Bookie was the man that they were going after. And, I learned a lot from David, really, in terms of his role as leader of the council. I was active in the county Labour Party at the time. I wasn't on the council. But Bookie, as we used to call him, used to always talk about, make sure that you're not officered. Make sure that, we're there as councillors, you're there to, as you represent the party, represent the people that put you there. And that kind of stayed with me, to be honest with you. He told a wonderful story about when Labour won back the council in 1981 after the catastrophe of 1977, where Labour got wiped out in whole swathes of local government. And Bookie, at that time, he retained his seat, but before that, he wasn't the leader. But when the leader had lost his seat in that election in 1977, the Labour group on Derbyshire County Council elected him as their leader. And he talks about when they came back to power in 1981, because the chief executive was not happy about Bookie being the leader and Labour coming back to power. And he was conspiring to try and organise a sort of a palace coup, if you like, and which never happened. And remember, first thing that Bookie did, he had a meeting with the chief executive, and the chief executive, I must get you an office sorted out, Councillor Bookbinder. He said, yeah, don't worry, I'll take this one. You go find yourself a new office. So he sent that very clear signal about it was Labour and the councillors that were in charge. But then he brought all of the chief officers and their assistants together to a meeting. And he was a wonderful orator, was David. And he went through this long speech about local government and how there'd always been a tradition of a partnership between the officers and the elected members. And all the officers were in great trepidation about worrying about what was going to happen. And he was saying, looking around, nudging themselves, saying, oh, maybe this is not going to be so bad. And then his operation was to say, well, I'm here to tell you the partnership is over. We're here to govern, and all of your delegated powers will be taken away. And so every decision had to go through either to full council or to the policy committee, as it was in those days. And then for minor decisions, it was a bit bureaucratic, but it sent a very clear signal. They established these delegation subcommittees. And they delivered some incredibly positive policies, it's got to be said. They had a free phone care service. They had very, very low priced school meals. During the miners' strike, they found a way of feeding the miners' kids, using council resources to do that, doing it in a way that was legal, that the Tories couldn't stop them from doing. He also refused to pay the police services that were coming in from outside to police the miners' strike. He refused to pay them and said, that's the matter. That's a national decision. And if the Home Office are instructing the police forces from other areas to come into our county, it's up to them to pay. We ain't paying. And, so things like that. And it was just wonderful to behold, and you would have been a great MP. And unfortunately, he got sidelined. I mean, he was, if like in a way, he was a sort of the Jeremy Corbyn equivalent in local government, because he was utterly demonised, reduced, and he got selected to stand in a few seats, actually. Very bad luck. He got selected to fight a very safe seat ahead of the 1983 election, but unfortunately there's boundary changes literally a few months before the election took place, and it created basically a couple of marginal seats that he could choose from. So he stood in what was the best prospect, but it was such a catastrophic year for us in 83. If I say us, keep saying us, obviously for the Labour Party, I was a member obviously then, that he lost out. And he then got by far and away the most nominations, because he originated from Manchester, and he got by far and away the most nominations, but then there was a kind of a dirty tricks whispering campaign against him by the powers that be inside the Labour Party, and they kind of made sure he didn't get the nomination. It's a real tragedy. So he never had the opportunity to perform on the national stage, but he would have been a colossus. He really would. But as I say, his legacy as local government is legendary in Derbyshire. People still talk about him, even though it's 20 odd years, 30 years, thinking about it. God, I'm getting old. Since Bucky stepped down as leader, and where are the David Bookbinders of today? Where are the Ken Livingstons in local government? Where are the Ted Knights? It's such a tragedy. I mean, local governments has so much potential, and yet those new Labour years really hollowed it out, and we became very managerial. And as I say, the days of municipal socialism are just kind of long gone. I mean, there's another great example of municipal socialism just up the road again from where I live, in Clay Cross, and where a couple of the Skinner brothers were very involved. David and Graham were councillors on there, and they refused to implement the so-called fair rent policy in 1972. They got barred from office and bankrupted. Then they all kicked out, and then a new group of councillors had to be elected. They again refused to implement the Tory policy. But it wasn't just the rent policy that they were refusing to implement, because they wanted to keep council rents lower than what the Tories were under Ted Heath saying that they should increase it by. But they were doing some amazingly groundbreaking stuff. I mean, back in 1970, 71, 72, they were providing free TV licenses for pensioners living in the Clay Cross area. I mean, I know this is available now, one of the good things that New Labour did when they came into government in 1997, but they were well ahead of the time. They were doing all those kind of things. And when Thatcher, she got the sobriquet Margaret Thatcher Milk Snatcher when she was Education Secretary, and she took the free milk away from the kids. They found a way of continuing to provide, the free milk for the kids. So they were just amazing. And so they were iconic. They were really inspiring days, to be honest with you. And that was the kind of thing, I suppose, that influenced me too, as well as my mum and dad. Those sorts of that stands, if you like, that I always saw the Labour Party as being the party, that stood up for the underdog, that actually did take on authority, was the insurgent party. How wrong was I in reality? Well, certainly in terms of the parliamentary level, and things, as we know, have just gone from bad to worse as far as the Labour Party is concerned, which is an absolute tragedy. I consider myself a Labour man, really, and I still often talk about us and we when I'm referring to past struggles in that sense. But of course, I'm no longer a member of the party, and I think our duty really is to destroy the Labour Party and start again.
Yeah, it's a hard habit to break. So who were the villains?
Oh well, obviously
the villains you came across?
Margaret Thatcher was clearly a villain. But, I mean, she makes my blood boil even now when I see her. One of the few people that really has a sort of like a visceral effect on me. So yeah, definitely her. But there were a number of them, the likes of of Keith Joseph, and frankly all the Tories. I mean, I got no time obviously for any of them really, but she was the person that turned the ship around really, and had a profound impact on not just Britain but the entire world. I mean, her and then the unhappy axis of evil that came about when Ronald Reagan got elected, and implementing neoliberalism, externalization, privatization, etc., that has had such a profound impact and led to huge suffering and poverty and war, of course, around the world, and all those jobs that were destroyed. Those good quality. It wasn't perfect. I mean, people like wage slaves, but you could. I mean, I left school at 15 in in Derby. I mean, I more or less left at 14 because I played truant for most of it. I shouldn't say this as you're a teacher, aren't you? But anyway, I played truant for most of the last year. I used to turn up to play for the school team, and then they dropped me from the school team for not going to school. So that sort of rained on my parade there. But you could actually get a job. I mean, I got a job very, very quickly. I mean, I left school. I got a job, I think, the following week. I trained for a while as an apprentice mechanical engineer. I couldn't get on with life in a factory, and then went into the building trade, went back into a factory for a bit, and then went back into the building trade. But I did actually get a trade. There was about 120,000 people working in manufacturing in Derby when I left school, and it's a much smaller city then, population wise. And the vast majority of those jobs have gone. I mean, many of those factories have just been razed to the ground. And places like Celanese, Courtaulds, as it became, 20,000 people working there, doesn't exist. The railway employed a similar number. They've got a couple of thousand now. Rolls-Royce employed 35,000. They've only got about 12,000 people. It's still a big employer, but only 12,000. 2/3 of those jobs have gone, and many, many, many others have gone. And so, working class people, and this was true all over the country, could look forward to a better life than their parents. They had the chance that they knew. I mean, irrespective of their background, really, if you like, or whether they've done well or not at school, or whether they went to the university or not, they could look forward to a good, decent standard of living and an improving standard of living. They could look forward to aspiring to buy their own home. They could, and if they didn't want to do that, there was the opportunity to get a council house. I mean, and those days are gone. It's a tragedy, really. Now I look around, look at my kids, and the opportunities available to them compared to what were available to me. I mean, they're just nowhere near. When people used to talk about the 1970s, I'd say I'd love to go back to the 1970s. I mean, there's a lot wrong with it, but there was a lot right with it too, actually. And I think if you could iron out the things that were wrong and bottle the positive aspects of the 1970s, that would be the kind of society that I would like to live in.
Yeah, I was a child of the Thatcher years, unfortunately, and I left school in 1986. And because of the high unemployment levels at the time, we were just carted straight onto the YTS scheme, which I don't know if many of our listeners will remember, the youth training scheme, where you earned £27.50 for a week's work. And ironically, I went to work for our local Tory MP.
God, how did that happen?
Quite by accident. I wanted to be a travel agent. I wanted to go work abroad. I wanted to be an overseas hotel rep and all the rest of it. But because I was only 16, I was too young to do any of that. So they stuck me on this YTS scheme, and I ended up doing administration. I had to go to college once a week, and so I ended up doing admin for the local Tory MP. So I was doing all his case notes and his letters and things like that. So
Crikey.
Interesting
so
time.
You've had a journey, though, Sian, yourself, then, from would-be travel agent for a Tory MP to a teacher and a trade union representative. I mean, what's your journey to where we are today?
Oh, crikey. Well, yeah, I did manage to get my job as an overseas holiday rep, and I did that for 4 years. Met my husband, who was in the RAF serving over in Cyprus. That's where I worked. I worked there for a few years. I went to Athens. I worked in Tunisia, Corfu. So, yeah, I had great times, great stories to tell. Probably not some stories that are worth telling on here. I'll tell you over a drink sometime. But yeah, it was great times. And then when I came home, I continued working in the travel industry for a few years, went into recruitment, opened my own business, and then got married, had children, and decided that I needed a stable career because my husband was a contractor. So I decided that was the time I went back to college. Well, I never went to college. I left school with a handful of CSEs at the time. So I went to college, did an access course with 2 babies in tow. They had a creche, which was great. So the kids would go in the creche. I could go in and do my studying. Did my access course over 9 months, and then got into the local university at Manchester Metropolitan and did a 4-year primary education degree there.
Did you have to pay for it back then, or was it?
Yes. Yeah, because it was only in 2000 that I did it. So I was 30 when I went to uni. And
a new Labour legacy. A new Labour legacy.
I still have the debt. All my student loan went to pay for childcare. So yes, I've still got about 18 and 19,000 pounds worth of debt. But hey ho, there you go. I think we might go to some questions now. as we've been talking particularly about local council, Chris, and your experience in that area, Phil Wagstaff's asked a question. He says he's standing in the county elections as an independent socialist and would appreciate some advice on countering the argument that they have to keep within the heavily reduced council funding. So councils at the moment are all, they've got no money, have they? I mean, they've government have heavily reduced the funding that councils have. So how can councils produce the council housing stock, for example, that they need and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot that local government can do, ironically made possible by the Tories, and county councils aren't directly responsible for housing. But interestingly, the recent Labour administration on Derbyshire County Council sadly lost at the last county council elections. They had a plan to create a housing development company, and they were going to start building houses for key workers. And it got scrapped. That plan did when the Tories came into office at the last county election, which was a tragedy. But in terms of the restrictions on spending, and county councils do provide really important services like social care and education, etc. There is the opportunity to introduce a redistributive council tax, because I think it was back in 2012, Eric Pickles, that well-known socialist, he piloted through a piece of legislation, the Local Government Finance Act, which gave local authorities the ability to introduce differential discounts. And so essentially that means that you can have a big increase across the piece, but then discount it back for the vast majority of the population that live in your county council or local borough area. And you can do that to the extent where you can essentially freeze, and maybe in certain circumstances, depending on how many properties you've got in the higher bands, reduce the council tax to the vast majority of people. And at a stroke, by doing that, you can stop the Tory cuts and not just make up for the cuts that have been made, but you can actually build in some room for growth. Now, the flip side of that is that you have to then go to a referendum with the local people. Was a cost to that. And no Labour group, I was in discussions when I was an MP with a number of local authorities who were considering it, but all of them backed off in the end. They were saying that they wanted the Labour Party in the House of Commons, the Labour leadership, to tell them to do it, or tell them it was okay to do it. I mean, my response was, why do you need them to? It's the law of the land. You've got the power in your hands. It's nothing to do with the front bench of the Labour Party in the House of Commons. So you have to go to a referendum if you decide that you're going to do something like that, and you'd have to get then the endorsement from the people in the area that you represent, in the county area or in the borough area that you represent. But I think that's a campaign that you could win, where you'd be going to the people and saying, well, look, this is where we are. It's not an ideal situation. We would sooner not be having to find these sort of clever ways of raising the finance that we need. But that our services are under the cosh from the cuts that the governments have made. We're going to ask the rich people in the borough, or in Phil's case, in the county, to shoulder the burden. And we're going to reduce the council tax, or certainly freeze it, for everybody else, for the vast majority of the rest of the public. And we also would like your view, you could say, on where you think we should use the additional resources that we'll be able to generate. Where should the priority be? Should it be on childcare? Should it be on social care, or in education, or a combination of those things, or on legislative? I mean, a range of different things. You can have a menu, a suite of things in terms of consulting with people. And I think that's a way of really engaging with people, because a lot of people don't participate in local elections. But I think, this is a way, I think, of really, reaching out to the people and making people feel that their voice counts, their voice is important, that they've got some influence over the local decisions that affect their life. And, would, I think, help with a whole kind of political consciousness raising in that sense. Because if you speak to a lot of people, they'll be have absolutely no idea about what local authorities, or which local authority does what it is they're responsible for. And I think this is quite an important way of increasing people's political education. If you go back, I mentioned the great titans of local government. back in the 70s and 80s. And people like Ted Knight, who was the leader of Lambeth Council, they mobilised their whole borough. I mean, they had thousands of people on the street who were with them. Look at what they did in Liverpool. I know Neil Kinnock, when he became the leader, was obsessed with expelling people who were associated with the militant tendency that dominated in Liverpool and a few other areas around the country. But they absolutely mobilised and kept winning elections despite all of the brickbats that were being thrown at them. And they built thousands of council houses. They improved services. When Derek Hatton was the chair, I think he was, of the fire and rescue service in Liverpool, he made all of the firefighters whole-time firefighters. I mean, they got rid of the whole kind of retained fire, where they have part-time firefighters, and really invested in the fire service. And these were the things that they kind of did. Of course, they never got any credit for that in the mainstream media for the wonderful things that they did do. They were just portrayed as extremists and all the rest of it. But the point was, they kept winning elections, and because they really mobilised the community, they really kind of interacted with the people, and that's what politics should be about. And I think there's an opportunity to do that. So that's what I'll be recommending. Obviously, in order to be able to pull that off, you need to win a majority. But that doesn't stop you, though. I mean, I don't know. I suspect Phil's standing in a part of the country where it's unlikely that people of his political persuasion will form a majority group on the authority. But nevertheless, either way, if Phil were to get on, or indeed in his election campaign, these are the things I think we should be putting to people, because a lot of people are just simply unaware of what is possible. And so I would highly recommend that people do look at that progressive council tax idea. And as far as people standing in local authorities, borough councils that are responsible for housing, the cap has been lifted on the housing revenue account now. There's no real impediment to building council houses. I mean, they are subject to right to buy. After 40 years, you get the full discount, but it's obviously some time down the track. The first, apartments are to build, and there is some discount that starts to kick in after 15 years. But there's also ways in which, through setting up arm's length council-run companies, you can actually build houses which are outside the right to buy provision. So there's things like that can be. You've got to be kind of innovative, I think, and look at ways of using the system and using the levers at your disposal. I coined a phrase when I was leader of the council, innovative pragmatism. We didn't necessarily agree with what New Labour government was doing, and we used to try and bend the sort of diktats from on high to reflect our local priorities. And that's the sort of thing I think I would like to see local councillors doing again today.
Chris, you talk about the raising of the council tax revenue. For example, in my area, there's a lot of elderly people, a lot of retired people that live where I live. And so their houses are probably they've got, obviously, since they bought them many years ago, 40, 50 years ago, they might have paid 10 grand for them, or even less in them days. But some of the houses around here are going for like $500,000 now, which is ridiculous. But those pensioners can't afford to pay. So if the council tax was based on a house that's now worth £500,000, they actually couldn't afford to pay any more council tax. They are actually quite hard up.
Well, there's two things I'd say to that. How
would you deal with that?
Well, two things I'd say to that. First of all, it's in a way it's irrelevant how much the house is valued today. It's what it was valued at in, I think it was 1991. There's not been a council tax revaluation since then. The likelihood is that the big mansions, the big properties worth that kind of money in your neck of the woods would probably be in the higher council tax bands.
Oh, they're only semis and bungalows.
As I say, then their present value is not relevant then in that sense. So you need to kind of look back. What band? What was the valuation in back in 1991? Because they go from bands A to H, and so I suspect most of those kind of semi-detached properties that you talk about, although they might be worth the kind of sort of money that you're just mentioning there, might still probably only be in band C or band D. So they would fall outside of the provisions of that. But anybody who was in a say a band band E, F, G, or H property where there perhaps would be a big increase, if they were asset rich but cash poor, the local authority could provide a much more generous council tax support scheme. I mean, bear in mind the council tax support scheme used to be a national social security benefit, but the Tories, or the coalition, actually localised it and made it a cash limited pot of money for local authorities. So they basically say, well, local authorities, you're going to take responsibility for this now. We're not going to give you the same. Well, they didn't say it quite this, but basically what happened was they didn't give them the resources to fully fund it, and those resources have been getting smaller over the years. And so consequently now, there are many people who would have previously qualified for 100% council tax benefit, 100% council tax rebate, are now being asked to make a contribution in many local authority areas, 10 or 20%, which is just absurd. I mean, and so a lot of people are just simply falling behind with their council tax. I mean, there is the provision to make hardship payments, and local authorities do that, make a hardship award to residents who are in that category. But because, as I've said, the money that is available is limited, is cash limited, and there are more and more people who are strapped for cash, so the demands on it are greater, the pot is getting smaller, so inevitably some people fall through the cracks. It's an absolutely appalling, crazy system. And of course, the stress that causes people who are in that situation. I mean, I used to be a welfare rights officer, and we used to do take-up campaigns to encourage people, to claim what was rightfully theirs. I'm a very big supporter of universal benefits. I don't like means-tested benefits because there's a massive stigma attached with them. And, there's a lot of people that, I used to work with, who were very reluctant to claim what was rightfully theirs. And you get this situation with this sort of council tax money, particularly now. People say, you'll have to apply for a hardship payment. I mean, people are very proud, and understandably so, and particularly of a certain generation. And they've got to go cap in hand. I mean, it's just a disgraceful system.
Well, it is disgusting.
And so just to answer your point, I mean, that can be addressed through having a much more generous, because you can raise more resources, so you can actually, deal with everybody, have a much more generous council tax council tax support scheme across the piece for those people who are already falling through the gaps. But anybody who would be dragged in through the big increase because they live in a big house, who couldn't afford to pay, could be covered through a more generous council tax support scheme. So there's no real problem about that. That could be addressed, and indeed would have to be addressed, I think, in order to deal with the problem that you've identified there.
Okay, we're going to go for go to a question now that came in from Twitter. This question is about proportional representation. And a lot of people have been talking about proportional representation in the last few months. And the question says, quite simply, campaign for proportional representation. As a country, the population largely favours progressive economic policy, yet under first past the post, we are continuously saddled with governments that enact right-wing economic policies.
Yes, a very good point. I mean, and you kind of look on the continent, and I know they've got their problems, but they've tended to have a more kind of progressive social policy in relation to things like housing, social security, and pensions, etc. than we have, and they all, or the vast majority anyway, have some form of proportional representation. And, we see this. I mean, they talk about the Labour Party, for example, being a broad church. I mean, I think it was Ian Lavery, actually, was formerly the chair of the Labour Party, said he thinks the church is too broad. I think he had to kind of row back a little bit from that. But he was absolutely right. It is too broad. Yeah, I mean, dominated by Tories. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, it's God knows how, but these people seem to float to the top and get, if you can call being in Parliament the top, and get into Parliament. I mean, they're totally unrepresentative, the people on the Labour benches. And of course, the Tories, we know that anyway. And so, I mean, absolutely, I think we should be pushing for proportional representation. Ironically, I was always against proportional representation. And in fact, I campaigned when there was a...
Chris, for those of us that are not sure about the difference between PR and FPTP, can you just explain the difference between the two?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the post essentially, is winner takes all. So, I mean, for example, when I won my seat in first time around in 2010, it was a sort of a 3-horse race between myself, the Tories, and the Liberals. Liberals came third, and obviously Tories second, and there was a few other odds and sods of independent parties and so on who stood. But I got in, I think, with just over 30% of the vote. And, we see across the country, I mean, Thatcher won a landslide majority across the country in 1983 and in 1987. And she won with a smaller proportion of the vote than she achieved in 1979. And that was because the Social Democratic Party, which was a breakaway group that was found of right-wing Labour MPs who didn't like the democratic reforms that Tony Benn was pushing through back in the day. And I think their task was set out really to stop a socialist government coming to power, and they succeeded in that because they split the Labour vote, and Thatcher benefited from that. So that's the thing about first past the post, winner takes all. It's the same system in the United States of America, and that's why their system is completely broken. You've got two corporate political parties in the Democrats and the Republicans, and we've got two corporate capitalist parties here, essentially, the Labour Party and the Tory Party. Even though the Labour Party is supposedly the party of the organised working classes, trade unions, many of them still affiliated to. That's throwing good money after bad. Proportional representation is a range of different systems of proportional representation. You can have a list system where it's literally strictly based on whatever national percentage share of the vote that you get determines how many seats you get in Parliament. That puts then a lot of power at the centre, though, in terms of who of a political party, that is, who they want to be on the list, as it were. And obviously, the higher up the list you are, the greater chance you have of getting elected. And so, I think that tends away from democratic accountability, I think, at a local level. But I think a hybrid system is possible. And we've got these hybrid systems operating already. I mean, the Scottish Parliament is elected on a hybrid system where they have a list system as well, but they've kept the constituency link as well. You kind of have bigger constituencies. So some people are elected based on, the vote that they get, and that's a kind of winner takes all arrangement. And some are elected off a list. Now you can also have a kind of proportional system for each constituency. So it's in a way it's a bit like the alternative vote system that we rejected in the referendum that was pushed for when the coalition was established, and the Liberals wanted this, and we remember we had that vote, and it was rejected. Where you can't get elected until you have at least 50% of the votes in that constituency. So there's a range of different methods available, but I favour myself. This is my only personal opinion. I mean, I think any proportional representation is probably better than what the system we've currently got. Although I would caution against the list system. But my preference would be that hybrid, because I think that enables you to keep that link, but also make sure that every vote counts. When I was going around the country on what we call the Democracy Roadshow, trying to garner support for greater democratisation of the Labour Party, making MPs accountable, giving members the right to determine policy, and a whole host of other democratic reforms that we wanted to bring about in order to then go on and be able to democratise society. But in a lot of those constituencies I went to, there were real safe Tory seats, and people were quite demoralised because they knew that whatever they did, although I used to say, look, there are no unwinnable seats now, because Labour was on the crest of a wave, if you remember, when just after Jeremy got the support that he did in that 2017 general election, then it all went wrong, as we know. But there was no unwinnable seats. We could win anywhere now. There's massive support for the sort of policy agenda that we are putting forward. There was that famous case where Giles Brandreth went round looking for secret socialists for the daily politics in Guildford, I think it was, the capital of the home counties. And the vast majority of people were very supportive of the policies of Jeremy Corbyn. But in reality, people felt that it's pointless campaigning. We want to really campaign in our own local area, but it's pointless doing it. Now, if you had a system like I'm talking about, where you had a hybrid system, or indeed if you went for the list system, that would motivate people to get out and campaign, because every single vote would matter, because the national share of the vote would make a difference in terms of the proportion of seats that you got in Parliament, as well as obviously the local vote. So I think it's a great way of encouraging people to engage in politics too, as a part of, a real part of the kind of whole thing I have about raising political consciousness and engagement. I think proportional representation would certainly go a long way to helping us to certainly do that. And the point is well made, actually, about the kind of right-wing economic agenda that is being pursued. I mean, and a bit like, as I was saying, with the Giles Brandreth secret socialist exercise that he did. I mean, people actually support a progressive socialist policy agenda, but are saddled with two political, well, three really, if you take the Liberal Democrats into account in this country anyway. Political parties, are bought into kind of neoliberalism, are bought into this kind of right-wing agenda, brought into this kind of, trickle-down economics, and it don't work. We know it doesn't work. 14 million people are living in poverty. I mean, millions of people are in precarious employment. There's a massive housing crisis, people sleeping in shop doorways in every town and city. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace when we've got the 5th biggest economy in the world. So the politics is broken, the system's broken, and we need to really argue for, it's a root and branch reform that we need. We need a kind of reform of our electoral system, absolutely. We need a reform of our sort of institutions, public institutions. They're not fit for purpose. We need to kick out the privateers making a killing, using our public services as a cash cow. I mean, Jack Straw said ahead of the 1997 election, he was a shadow Home Secretary, I think, at that time, that we wouldn't pursue the privatisation of prisons agenda. Then accelerated it when he got into office. I mean, it's an absolute scandal that people, like they do in the States, are making money out of the judicial system, out of the penal system in this country. I mean, frankly, I'd shut the prisons anyway, because they don't really serve a useful purpose. I don't think we should be sending people to prison anyway. I mean, I think there are other ways of dealing. We're not saying you kind of just let people loose who are a danger to the public, but the vast majority of people in prison are not a danger to the public. So that deals with that one. But I think people, very often it's a matter of the support and the care, the health care that is needed for people, and that's what we should be focusing on. And I actually remember doing some research for a book that I contributed to back in 2017, and this was kind of looking at what was possible under a Jeremy Corbyn government. And I was asked to look at the criminal justice system, and in my research for that book, looking at how much we spend as a country on, sending kids to prison, sending adults to prison. I mean, it's something like I can't remember the precise figures off the top of my head now, but something like £250,000 for some per year. I'm sure it was of that order. It was a substantial 6-figure sum.
It's disgusting when we could be investing that money into those kids. A lot of them come from troubled backgrounds, instability, mental health problems. That £250,000 could get them back on the right path and set them up for the rest of their life.
It's just the system is so broken. It's just not working. We should be investing. We should be eradicating poverty, eradicating the housing crisis, reducing the working week, investing in education, giving people a stake in society, giving people, the confidence and the security that a country that has the 5th biggest economy in the world should be providing to its people.
Yeah, absolutely. Going on from the proportional representation, I was thinking about something really radical, Chris. What about smashing up the system and starting again? What about devolving government to, counties, or having citizens' assemblies even? What's your thoughts on that?
We absolutely should. I mean, when I was a councillor, I was very involved in arguing for devolving powers. I mean, and I used to really irritate me having to go cap in hand to some anonymous minister, or worse, some anonymous civil servant who, eaten educated probably, and I'm being a bit prejudiced now, but that was my experience of public school educated anyway, and then off to Oxbridge and then into the civil service, telling me about what was, required for Derby. What the bloody hell do they know about Derby? We know what the situation was in Derby. We had a finger on the pulse. We were kind of working with people on the ground at the local level, and the sort of things that we wanted to do, having to go cap in hand all the time, was just really irksome. And I remember when I was when Ed Miliband sacked me from the front bench for being too supportive of the Fire Brigade Union in their dispute over pensions, I managed to get on to the local government communities local government select committee, and we did a report on fiscal devolution, actually. And as part of the study, we looked at example in the French model, and we went over to, I think it was Lyon, and looked at the sort of model that they'd got there. They were quite embarrassed, actually, when we spoke to some of their representatives, because they felt they were overly centralised. I said, my God, mate, it's like Nirvana. What you've got, would be like Nirvana to us, because they had so much discretion, so much power to be able to do things without having to go to the government to get permission for it. I remember when we were looking to radically transform our public transport in Derby, and we were looking to draw down something called the Transport Innovation Funding that the new Labour government had put in place. And the quid pro quo for that was that we would have had to have introduced some form of congestion charging, which we modelled to not apply to city residents and to only apply at peak times. But we were told by these civil servants when they came down with Rosie Winterton, who was the Transport Secretary at the time, that because I wanted to have trams, and we got Bombardier in Derby that kind of build trams. I wanted to have a trams in Derby, anyway, they were saying, no, that doesn't meet our value for money test. And it was absurd. And the thing that really kind of sort of took the biscuit was when they were telling me how long it was going to take before that we could access the funding. And I was at cross purposes with them, because I was saying I appreciate take a number of years to kind of conclude this, and I was saying to get the whole thing in place. We've got some great plans which I won't bore you with the details of now. Very significant plans that didn't unfortunately include trams. But then they were telling me it's going to take 4 years to do all of the feasibility from their perspective. I mean, just crazy, Whereas in Montpellier, the mayor decided around about the time that we were looking at that they wanted to put trams. The reason I know this because I was talking to the guys at Bombardier, and they supplied the kit for him. He'd done it within 4 years. I mean, the whole thing was just up and done and running. I mean, and he'd been able to issue a local government bond, to raise the finance for it, with no question of him having to get that signed off by central government. Whereas here, it's very much a parent-child relationship, and that's wrong, and that needs to be changed. So yeah.
Going back to our chat, Neil Aldridge asks, how do party politics translate into council practice when your party isn't in power? Great question, Neil.
Well, I mean, I think what you do, I don't know what you think on this, Sian, is that when you're not in power, you've got a real opportunity then to embarrass the administration, to put forward, a proposition that, or propositions, policies, as it were, like this redistributive council tax and the council house building programme that I mentioned. You could really embarrass the administration, and I think the important thing, I was always very strongly of the view that as elected councillors, you should be kind of elected community champions and not be spokespeople for the council, which unfortunately many councillors end up becoming. And I used to, when I was leader of the council, I had a banned phrase, so any cabinet member couldn't refer to the department that they were running as my department. It's not your department, and we're not here. Me, even as the leader of even here as the leader of the council, I'm not here to be a spokesperson for the council. I'm here to be a spokesperson for the people that's elected us and for the party, because the bureaucracy doesn't need us. The bureaucracy would carry on quite nicely without us. So I think that's it gives you an opportunity. But I think if behind the question was, should party politics, be a feature of local government, I think it's an inevitability in a way that in order to get things done, you need to get a majority. And so, you've got to get people on side. I mean, it always amuses me when you see these local authorities referred to as being run by the independents, what is it like, or an independent group. Well, they are actually agreeing on a sort of a platform, as it were. And if you don't do that, if you are unable to reach a majority, then the bureaucrats just run rings around you, and you don't really get through the sort of agenda that most people, I'd like to think anyway, who are interested in standing, want to try and make a difference, really. And so,
but as a movement, we've got people on the ground now. If we know what's going on, we know what kind of policies we want to put forward, we can embarrass them, can't we? We can embarrass those council leaders by saying, look, we know you can do this. This is how you can do it. We can lobby them. We can have meetings with our councillors. We can demonstrate. We can protest at the town hall. I've done it myself as a trade union rep, against all the academy schools that they were opening up in our area. We had I called a big meeting outside and really embarrassed the council leader. It's easily done, and I think on a local level it's easier.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and I think it's so important to be those elected, community champions, and even if you're not elected, if you're just the kind of candidate, as it were, and potential prospective candidate, to be that spokesperson for local people and encourage people, to put their views forward and and to, as I say, be the voice of the people in the council, not the other way around. And what I would also recommend people do, if they're interested in being active and getting involved, is get hold of a book called Rules for Radicals, because that talks about the sort of tactics that you can employ in actually, being an effective campaigner. And obviously there's a place for demonstrations at town halls, but I think, as Dave Roberts, who's on our national committee, said to us, that the thing about local town halls is they're like fortresses, really, designed to sort of protect the councillors and the chief officers, as it were. And so, he was talking about, and I think this is a recommendation within the Rules for Radicals, you go to the councillors, their place of employment, or go to their surgery, or go to their home. Obviously not to kind of intimidate them or anything like that, but just sort of go to places where they haven't got that sort of built-in protection, as it were, that they have at the town hall. There's definitely a place for the town hall thing as well, but I think you need to use all things at your disposal.
We found out what night the council meet, and we made sure we were there quite early, so they couldn't sneak in through the back door, and we collared them on the doorstep. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But I think as well, I mean, for me, what we need to be doing, Sean, and what we are trying to do, of course, is obviously build this movement. That's really crucially important. So people's political consciousness is raised about the potential of what can be done. But also to encourage, new working class leaders to come through, to put themselves forward. I mean, and to get into elected positions. Because, as I keep saying, we need a twin track approach. We need an electoral strategy, yes, but if that's all you're relying on, you're going to be sorely disappointed. You need that social movement as well, to actually keep the elected representatives on the straight and narrow, as it were, but also to be their eyes and ears, and to have that real important partnership between the elected representative and the activists and the people on the ground.
Kevin Rathbone says, any more reading recommendations for political socialism?
Well, I would all get hold of Tony Benn's arguments for democracy. That's definitely worth reading. And another one, I'll give you a great big long list, but another one which is, and that's an old book, but I think it still stands. Reclaiming the State by Bill Mitchell, really important book, that, and talking about the modern monetary theory and but essentially, as the name implies, how we can reclaim the state and basically make the state work in the interests of the people, work in the interests of the majority, work in the interests of the 99%. Because at the moment we've got a system, where it's working in the interests of the 1%, and our representative democracy is working in the interests of corporate capitalist elites, not in the interests of the vast majority. And that's because they are prone to the kind of lobbying tendencies that you see, and the powerful elites, the oligarchs. They've got the resources, they've got the brass to invest in these lobbyists, and they obviously use it ruthlessly to make sure that they get their way, and that's the sort of thing that we need to be challenging. Because if we stand together, we can really.
Anything's possible, isn't it? And I'm really pleased to announce that we have around 6 resist candidates standing under the Tusk umbrella for the local elections, and we have 2 independent socialists standing down in Norfolk. So that's great. That's brilliant. And Tusk have got well over 300 candidates now. I'm sure we'll get the final count any day now. But they've got over 300 candidates standing nationwide. So I would ask everybody to support your local Tusk candidate. It's the Trade Union Socialist Coalition. Find out who's standing and go out and support them if you can. And whilst I'm just doing a bit of housekeeping, I just want to remind people that our RTV goes out on podcast now, so you can listen to it in your car. Recommend it to your friends. It goes out on Red Circle, Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon Music, Stitcher, and Radio Public. So if you're listening to this on the podcast, welcome, and thank you very much for listening to us. And please do tune in to our next show, which hopefully will be some of our candidates that are going to be standing in the local elections. I think next week we've got a few of those candidates coming on to talk to us, which will be great. Chris, I want to finish on a positive note. You must have some funny stories from when you were in Parliament, in the House of Commons. Are there any particular funny stories that spring to mind that you can tell us? I do like a bit of gossip.
Funny stories. That's a difficult one actually, because it was mainly kind of miserable actually most of the time that I was down. I suppose it was a funny as well as a funny ha story where Ian Austin, Lord Austin as he's now known, scourge of socialists, Zionist to the core. Very hostile to Jeremy Corbyn. He, if you remember, interrupted Jeremy when Jeremy was speaking on the Chilcot report, about the Iraq War. And anyway, we didn't get on, and I remember him bawling me out actually. I'd gone. This was back in I think about 2011, and I was in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and Liam Byrne had come in to tell us how we should get behind as a party the benefit cap, which I thought was absolutely outrageous. I mean, he started off by saying we shouldn't fight the Tories on their territory, and then proceeded to say, let's support the benefit cap. It was absolutely absurd. Anyway, I made a very impassioned speech saying that if we are serious about social security reform, we shouldn't be penalising the victims of a Tory policy failure. The housing benefit bill had gone through the roof, up to about, I think, 25 billion pounds back then. So I said, we should be, if we want to do something about that, we should be saying, well, let's bring in rent controls. Let's argue for building new council houses. And let's also remember that it's not just a Tory policy failure, it's our policy failure, because we were in government for 13 years and we did bugger all about it. Anyway, made this speech and I got a good reaction from a lot of people, and various people were coming up to pat me on the back, and saw Ian Austin, who I'd given some information to because I was Shadow Fire Minister then, and he was very, very complimentary, believe it or not, about me, and saying, I'm absolutely marvellous what you've just done, and exactly what Shadow Ministers should be doing. Most of them don't do, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, he came over to me. I was expecting another kind of slap on the back, and he was launched into this kind of tirade about me grandstanding and this, that, and the other. And we then... I walked out one door, he walked out of another in committee room 14, and we walked down. I turned left out the corridor, down the corridor, and he was coming out the other. So the argument started again. Then Angela Regal joined in on his side, and argument carried on all the way down the stairs. Anyway, fast forward to a few years back. This was back 2017, and I'd been up to see Jeremy in the leader's office, and I was walking down. He was in Norman Shaw South building, and as you come down, you then have to sort of go down and then across this. There's like this kind of bridge that takes you over to Portcullis House, and in closing, you go through the doors. And I saw him coming in. I thought, oh bloody hell, this in Austin. I don't want to speak to him. So I kind of and he saw me, and there's a bit of a stand up. Anyway, I turned around and walked on and thinking, I hope he's not following my. Anyway, then I could hear his footsteps behind me. I thought, oh shit, So anyway, I got to the door. I thought, well, I'm not being an idiot. I'll open the door and I'll hold the door for him, and he wouldn't walk through it. And I said, after you. And he said, no, I'm not walking through that. I said, well, come on, yes, after you. And he said, no. And I said, look, don't be so ridiculous. Walk through the door as a comrade. You're no comrade of mine. He shouts out, spitting out. And then he eventually did go through. And then he started berating me about Ken Livingstone and being an anti-Semite and all this malarkey. Anyway, I told Squawkbox about it. And so Squawkbox rang him up for a comment, you see, and he was absolutely bloody furious. So they then rang my office, and Lewis answered the phone, and he said, "Oh God, it's Ian Austin's on the phone." And anyway, so I was all right, very jolly, and picked up the phone and said, "Oh, hello, mate, how are you?" "Oh, mate, oh no, mate." And then it was obviously really rankled with him because he said, "You called me comrade, and then you did a thing like that to me." So he was really, really pissed off about the fact that that Squawkbox had got hold of his intemperate behaviour, and he was because I was saying, "Have you spoken to them?" And I sort of hesitated momentarily because I wasn't sure if Steve from Squawkbox had actually spoken to him and told him I'd spoken to him. And then he said, "Yes, you've spoken to him, haven't you? You've called in the mob." I'm thinking, who are you talking about? Not party members, That's. I mean, so yeah. That's yeah. So
I thought you were going to tell
the
the story about singing "Celebrate Good Times," but maybe we'll save
Well,
that for another time.
That's another one. That's another one. Yeah.
We'll save that for another time.
Yeah.
Chris, I have thoroughly enjoyed tonight's show. It's been great to just kick back, relax, ask questions, and just be ourselves for a change, really, and let people see who we really are. So I want to thank everybody in the chat. We've had loads of people in. Before we go tonight, don't forget, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and please press on the notification bell so that you don't miss any further episodes. Chris, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from you. Thanks a lot. See you,
Thanks,
comrades.
everyone. See you next week.
Good night.